The dining room of the Langford Grand shimmered in gold and glass, the kind of place where people didn't come to eat as much as they came to be seen. Crystal chandeliers threw soft light over marble floors, polished so perfectly that the reflections of the rich almost looked more real than the people themselves. Waiters moved between tables in quiet, rehearsed patterns, their faces calm masks over tired eyes. Ethan Cole balanced a tray on one hand as he slipped out of the kitchen doors. His black vest was a little too big, his shoes a little too worn, but his movements were precise. He had learned how to be invisible here. Invisible people didn't get yelled at. Invisible people kept their jobs. Table 12, he reminded himself. VIP. He glanced at the small order slip. Sparkling water, no ice. Salad without dressing. Steak, rare. If the chef knows what that means. The last line was underlined twice, written by a hostess who had rolled her eyes as she passed it to him. "They're in a mood tonight," she'd muttered. Good luck. Ethan didn't need luck. He needed hours. Hours meant tips. Tips meant rent and his daughter's school lunch card staying loaded for another week. He nudged the kitchen door open with his back and walked into the brightness, his expression neutral, his mind already shifting into the quiet, careful focus that kept him steady. Table 12 sat near the far window, overlooking the city skyline. For people in expensive clothes, glittering watches, and practiced boredom. At the center was a woman in a silver suit jacket, posture straight, chin slightly lifted, like the room belonged to her and she was only tolerating the rest of them. Victoria Langford, owner of the hotel, Billionaire. He had seen her photo in financial magazines before. The first time had been years ago, on a glossy cover in an airport kiosk, under a headline about ruthless efficiency and record-breaking profits. Back then he'd been the man who read the article for the numbers, not for the gossip. Back then, he'd worn tailored suits instead of this vest. Ethan pushed that version of himself away and stopped at the table. "Good evening," he said quietly. "Welcome to the Langford Grand. My name is Ethan. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Victoria glanced up at him, not really looking, just scanning the way people did when they'd spent too long around staff who didn't matter. Her gaze snagged on his face for half a second. Something flickered there. Then she blinked, and it was gone. "You're new," she said. "No, ma'am," Ethan replied. "Just usually on the earlier shift." She leaned back in her chair. "Water." He nodded and set a chilled bottle of sparkling water on the table, pouring it with steady hands. No ice. He didn't need to reread the slip. Details were easy. Details were safe. It was people who were hard. Her companions barely acknowledged him. One man checked his phone between every breath. Another woman scrolled through market charts on her tablet. They spoke about buyouts and board votes and someone's mistake that had cost them only 8 figures, thank God. Ethan listened without reacting. Old habits never truly left. Numbers still arranged themselves in his mind out of reflex. Ratios, risk, timing. He tried not to care. Victoria took a slow sip of water, then set her glass down and turned her attention fully to him for the first time. "What did you do before this?" she asked. The question was casual in tone, but the table went quieter. Her friends looked up with lazy interest. Ethan didn't flinch. "This," he said. "Service." A small, sharp smile crossed her lips. "No, before this. Men don't end up waiting tables in their late 30s because it was their childhood dream." The comment earned a chuckle from the man to her right. Ethan felt the sting of it but kept his voice level. "I've done a few things," he said. "Nothing relevant now." "Humor me," Victoria said. "I'm curious." He could have lied. He had practice. Construction, retail, odd jobs. People believed those. They fit the picture they expected. But something in her gaze, cold, assessing, made him tired. There was a game she was playing, and he knew it even if he didn't know the rules. "I worked with numbers," he said finally. "Ah," she tilted her head. "Accounting? Strategy," Ethan replied. The word slipped out before he could soften it. Her expression sharpened. "For who?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. One of the men at the table laughed. He probably means he balanced his own checkbook. Ethan smiled politely. Your steak will be out shortly, he said. In the meantime, can I bring anything else? Victoria didn't let him leave. Answer the question, she said. Who did you work for? Something inside him wanted to turn away, to walk back into the safety of the kitchen. The clatter and heat and noise where no one expected anything from him except not to drop plates. But another part, a quieter, older part that remembered conference rooms and glass walls and models projected on screens, was tired of pretending he had never existed before this place. I consulted for investment firms, he said. Portfolio structuring, risk analysis, acquisition timing. Nothing you'd find interesting. Victoria's eyes narrowed. The market charts woman lowered her tablet. The man with the phone looked up properly for the first time. What was the last firm? Victoria asked. Ethan met her gaze. Langford Holdings, he said. The table fell fully silent. The only sound was the soft hiss of the kitchen doors behind him. Victoria stared at him as if seeing a ghost. That's impossible, one of her companions said lightly. Victoria would remember hiring you. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his gaze stayed calm. No, he said. You wouldn't. I was the one you only saw in reports, right before you ignored my last warning. For a moment, no one at the table moved. No one breathed. The quiet stretched thin, humming with tension. Victoria Langford's expression didn't shift, but something sharp flickered in her eyes. Recognition, disbelief, and a flash of annoyance, as if she'd been caught without knowing there was even a game being played. You're implying I ignored your warning, she said, her tone smooth but edged. Ethan didn't flinch. You didn't ignore it. You dismissed it. He kept his voice calm, steady, almost gentle. Your board trusted the projections, not the analysis. The man beside her scoffed. What projection? What analysis? Victoria raised a hand, silencing him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Ethan. Which report? She asked quietly. The one predicting the Phoenix acquisition failure, Ethan said. 8 years ago. You pushed it through anyway. Her companions froze. Everyone in finance remembered that deal. A deal she had famously insisted on despite internal dissent. A deal that burned through millions, damaged her reputation for a time, and nearly derailed an entire sector of her company, until she rebuilt from scratch. How would you know that? The man demanded. Those reports were confidential. Ethan looked at him like the answer was obvious. Because I wrote the one she didn't read. Victoria inhaled sharply. Across the table, her tablet screen lit up with notifications, alerts on automated keyword hits. His name, the firm's archives, old internal documents. She slowly pushed her chair back. The room felt suddenly too small. Follow me, she said, standing. Her companions exchanged looks. One man muttered, Who does this waiter think he is? The woman with the tablet whispered, This is going to be entertaining. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she walked toward a private corridor. Ethan followed, his pace unhurried, carrying no fear, only the weight of old memories resurfacing. They stopped in a small private lounge lined with quiet lighting and thick carpets. The noise of the dining room faded behind them. Victoria turned, folding her arms. Explain. Ethan set his tray down. I was one of 5 analysts assigned to the Phoenix file. The youngest. The one no one listened to. How old are you? She asked sharply. 38. Which would make you 29 at the time, Ethan said. Yes. Victoria studied him, and for the first time there was something new in her eyes. Not power, not superiority. Curiosity. Why didn't I know your name? She asked. You didn't bother learning the names of anyone below senior strategist, he said softly. You only trusted results, not the people behind them. That hit. She blinked once, sharply. Ethan continued. I was good, but quiet. I didn't fight in the boardrooms. I didn't fight for credit. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I wasn't the kind of man executives notice. His voice held no bitterness, just truth. And you left without a trace, she said. Not a transfer. Not a resignation. Nothing. It was like you vanished. I did vanish. Why? Ethan hesitated, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small item. A child's woven bracelet, frayed and faded, once bright with tiny beads. My daughter, he said quietly. She was 5. She got sick, and I chose her over everything else. Victoria's breath hitched, just enough for only someone watching closely to notice. What happened? She asked. She survived? Ethan said, a small, relieved smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. But treatment was aggressive, travel was constant, and the job suddenly meant nothing compared to keeping her alive. He looked down at the bracelet. I walked out of a meeting and never walked back in. Victoria exhaled slowly. You sacrificed a multimillion-dollar career for a child. He lifted his gaze to hers, steady. I didn't sacrifice anything. I chose her. Something in the billionaire's expression softened, an almost invisible shift. But softness was dangerous for people like her. She straightened her posture, spine tightening. So after everything, you ended up here. Her tone wasn't mocking now. It was bewildered, almost offended on his behalf. Service industry work is honest, Ethan said simply. Flexible shifts let me take my daughter to her appointments. It pays just enough to keep us afloat. But your mind... She stopped herself, searching for the right word. Ethan, people like you don't work tables. They build empires. No, he said gently. People like you build empires. People like me used to help them avoid burning them down. She almost laughed, but the sound didn't come. Instead, she walked to the window, staring down at the city lights shimmering through the glass. I want proof, she said finally. Show me what you know. Ethan nodded once. Give me a file. Without hesitation, she sent a digital folder to a nearby tablet and handed it to him. It contained raw data, market signals, acquisition plans, restructuring angles, cash flow threats. He scanned silently for 30 seconds. Then he began speaking. Calm, clear, precise. You're about to overpay for the Redwood merger, he said. Your ROI projections are inflated. They're banking on growth that's plateauing. Your board will blame your CFO, but the real issue is duplication of infrastructure. If you consolidate the 2 smallest branches and pivot their assets into municipal bonds during the downturn, your risk drops by 70%. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Ethan kept going. And if you stabilize the liquidity ratios using a staggered repurchase schedule instead of what your advisors recommended, you retain leverage without scaring the shareholders. Victoria stared. Her pulse kicked. This wasn't analysis. This was mastery. You did all that in 30 seconds? I've done this my whole adult life, Ethan said. Some things don't disappear when your world collapses. They just go quiet. Victoria lowered herself into a chair, stunned. She couldn't decide whether to be impressed, guilty, or afraid. This could save me millions, she whispered. He nodded. I know. Silence pressed between them, thick, complicated, edged with possibility. Then she met his eyes. Why didn't you come back? She asked. To finance, to strategy. You could have rebuilt everything. Ethan's answer was soft. Because my daughter still needs me, and the world you live in doesn't allow men like me to have both success and time. Victoria Langford, who had built an empire by sacrificing every personal relationship she'd ever had, went completely still. Her voice came quietly. You're wrong. Ethan waited. You haven't met someone who was willing to give you both, she said. Until now. He stared at her, confused, cautious. Victoria didn't look away. I want you back in strategy, she said. For me, for my company, for something far bigger than this restaurant. Ethan shook his head gently. I can't work 80-hour weeks anymore. You won't have to. He blinked. She leaned forward. I'll build the position around you. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the world shift beneath him. Not collapsing this time. Opening. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stood there, hands at his sides, the the soft glow of the lounge lighting washing over his worn vest and the faint creases in his tired eyes. He looked like a man who had accepted smallness because life had forced him into it. And now this woman, a billionaire with a reputation for being untouchable, was telling him she wanted to reshape her world for him. He didn't know how to process it. "Ethan," Victoria said more softly than before, "I don't make offers I can't uphold. If I say I can build a role around you, I will." He shook his head. "It's not that simple." "It is," she said. "You're brilliant. You're wasted here." His eyes hardened, not with anger, but with memory. "Brilliance didn't matter when my daughter was hooked up to machines," he said. "Brilliance didn't hold her hand when she was too weak to walk. And brilliance didn't pay for the surgeries insurance refused to cover. My time did. My presence did. And I won't surrender that again." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She had power, yes. But parenting, being needed by a child who depended on you for everything, that was a kind of power she had never known. Instead, she said, "How old is she now?" 8, Ethan replied. "Healthy, happy, stable, but still fragile in ways you don't see on paper. And you're raising her alone." He nodded. Victoria leaned back, folding her arms. "Then let me adjust my offer." He raised an eyebrow. "You work your hours. You set your schedule. Remote work if needed. I don't care if you log in at midnight or 3 in the afternoon, as long as the work is done. Your daughter comes first. Non-negotiable." Ethan studied her carefully. "Why are you doing this?" She hesitated. "You embarrassed me," she admitted. "But more than that, you revealed how blind I've been to talent that doesn't come wrapped in status. I built a company on merit, and yet I failed to see yours." A breath. "I don't intend to make that mistake twice." His expression didn't soften. "That can't be all." Her jaw flexed. "It isn't." She looked away for the first time that night. "You gave me analysis that 10 advisors couldn't agree on. You saw patterns I missed. And you did it without arrogance, without agenda." She turned back to him. "My company is preparing for a transition, a major one. I need someone who sees the danger before the board does. Someone who doesn't flatter me, doesn't fear me, and doesn't need anything from me except a paycheck." "And why me?" he asked quietly. "Because you're the only one who analyzed me honestly," she said. "Everyone else tells me what I want to hear." The silence between them grew heavier, deeper. Finally, Ethan ran a hand over his face, exhaustion settling into his bones. "My daughter is at home waiting for me," he murmured. "I need to get back." Victoria nodded immediately. "Of course. Let me drive you." He blinked. "No, that's not necessary." "Ethan," she said, almost amused. "It's nearly midnight. You walk to the bus stop at this hour?" "Absolutely not." He didn't argue further. The ride was quiet at first, city lights rolling across the leather interior of her black SUV. Victoria drove herself, something that surprised him. He'd expected a chauffeur, but she seemed strangely at ease behind the wheel, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly undone from the long evening. Ethan watched the night blur past his window. "Where do you live?" she asked finally. "Eastwood Apartments," he said. She frowned slightly. "That area isn't safe. It's what I can afford." Victoria didn't comment, but her grip on the steering wheel tightened, just barely. When they pulled up to his building, a flickering security light buzzed overhead. Faded paint, narrow stairwell, old pipes hissing in the cold air. Victoria took in everything quietly. "So this is where you come home after double shifts?" she said softly. "Yes." "And where your daughter grows up?" "Yes." Her expression shifted, one he couldn't name. A blend of guilt, realization, and something that resembled responsibility. "Ethan," she said, "this isn't right." "It's life," he replied simply. She exhaled, almost frustrated. "It doesn't have to be." He opened the door. "Good night, Miss Langford." "Victoria," she corrected. He paused, hand on the doorframe. "Good night, Victoria." The next morning, Ethan left early, slipping out before his daughter woke. He couldn't lose this job, not after everything. But when he arrived at the restaurant, the staff buzzed with whispers. "Did you hear? She stayed after hours with him. Why would a billionaire talk to a waiter? Is he getting fired or promoted?" Ethan ignored them and tied his apron. He needed stability, not rumors. But minutes into his shift, the general manager strode toward him, pale and flustered. "Mr. Cole, Ms. Langford is requesting you upstairs." Ethan stiffened. "Why?" She didn't say, only that it was urgent. His heart thudded. He followed the manager through polished hallways and into the executive conference suite. Victoria stood inside, dressed sharply, tablet in hand. "Sit," she said. He did. She slid a digital document across the table. "I drafted a proposal for your position," she said. "You'll work from home or from my office when convenient. 30 hours a week. Full salary equivalent to an executive strategist. Benefits for your daughter. Medical coverage. School support. Retirement contributions. No late nights unless you choose them." Ethan felt the world tilt. "This is generous," he said quietly. "No," Victoria said. "This is overdue." He took a breath. "Victoria, I don't know if I can trust your world again." Her voice softened. "Then don't trust my world. Trust me." His gaze lifted slowly. She held it. Steady, unflinching, sincere. "Ethan," she said, "you are the most brilliant mind I've ever encountered. If you walk away from this because you think you don't deserve more than survival, then I will consider that my greatest professional failure." A lump rose in his throat. He looked down at the bracelet around his wrist. His daughter's world could be safer, brighter, more stable, and she deserved that. So did he. Finally, Ethan whispered, "I'll try, on one condition." Victoria leaned forward. "Name it." "My daughter always comes first." Victoria's smile was small but genuine. "Then we start on the same page." He nodded, and something in his chest eased. Like a door he'd kept locked for years had finally creaked open. "Welcome back to strategy," she said softly. And for the first time in a decade, Ethan let himself hope. Ethan began his consulting work the following week. Quietly, cautiously, the way a man steps onto a frozen lake, not sure if the ice will hold. He kept his waiter job during the transition, unwilling to risk everything on one promise, even one made by a billionaire who seemed determined not to fail him. But Victoria insisted he join her in the executive suite at least twice a week. "This isn't about status," she had said. "It's about access to information. You can't fix problems you're not allowed to see." She wasn't wrong. Now, Ethan sat in a vast conference room, a place he hadn't stepped into since he walked away from corporate life years ago. The walls were lined with screens showing global market activity. Numbers pulsed across the displays. Familiar, almost comforting. But the room wasn't what made him uneasy. It was the people in it. Executives, advisors, analysts who wore tailored suits and held expensive pens between manicured fingers. They looked at him like he didn't belong, like his thrift store shirt and quiet voice were intrusions in their polished world. Some whispered as he entered, "That's him. The waiter. Why is Victoria bringing outsiders into strategy meetings?" Ethan ignored all of it and took a seat near the corner, away from the table. He would have disappeared entirely if he could. But Victoria didn't let him. She stood at the head of the table, eyes sharp. "Let's begin." The meeting opened with presentations and projections. Numbers Ethan recognized, weaknesses he could see immediately. But he stayed silent. This wasn't his place. Not yet. One executive droned on about market expansion, completely misreading the risk factors. Another presented a restructuring model missing 3 crucial variables. The room nodded along, clueless. Victoria's eyes flicked toward Ethan. He shook his head slightly. "Not yet." She frowned. Finally, a senior advisor finished a 20-slide explanation about a proposed acquisition. When he ended, he leaned back with a smug smile, expecting praise. Victoria looked at Ethan again. "Thoughts?" The room stiffened. Ethan swallowed. He hadn't expected to be called on this soon. Ms. Langford, the advisor interrupted. I don't think we need opinions from someone who... Victoria's gaze snapped to him. I didn't ask you. The room fell silent so fast it seemed the air paused mid-breath. Ethan rose slowly, fingers tightening around the printed reports. He didn't speak immediately. He studied the charts with the same quiet intensity he used to rebuild his daughter's world. Careful, steady, deliberate. Then he began. The timeline is unrealistic, he said softly. Your valuation is inflated by at least 12%. Your risk assessment doesn't account for the competitor's shifting liquidation strategy, and the projected ROI is based on models that don't survive a market correction. The advisor reddened. These models were built by professionals. Ethan met his gaze calmly. Professionals who didn't cross-check with foreign currency fluctuations or secondary market indicators. Meaning? Someone asked. Ethan tapped a page. Meaning if you move forward with this acquisition, you'll lose $30 million in the first quarter. A murmur rippled through the room. The advisor sputtered, That's absurd. Victoria cut him off. Explain your findings, Ethan. He did. Clear, calm, precise. He walked them through every error, every oversight, every blind spot. He highlighted risk curves, liquidity threats, hidden vulnerabilities. The table fell into stunned silence. When he finished, the advisor glared at him. Who do you think you are? Ethan answered quietly. Someone who's been right before. Victoria looked at the advisor. Redo the entire model. And take note. If Ethan says something's off, assume it's off. It was the closest thing to a throne room decree the company had ever seen. After the meeting, staff scattered like startled birds. Some avoided Ethan. Others stared at him with a mix of awe and resentment. But one by one, they realized what Victoria already knew. He wasn't the waiter anymore. He was the strategist. Victoria approached him once the conference room emptied. You did well, she said. He shook his head. I don't want to embarrass your team. You didn't embarrass them. You revealed the truth. If they can't handle being wrong, that's their flaw, not yours. Ethan studied the table, his voice soft. This world is brutal, Victoria. I left because I didn't want to become like this again. You won't, she said. You're building a new version of it. One where a brilliant father gets to be both a strategist and a parent. He gave a faint smile. You have a lot of faith in me. I've built empires on less. In the following days, Ethan's role expanded slowly. He reviewed proposals, rebuilt models, silently corrected senior executives. Victoria handed him more responsibilities, carefully observing how he handled each one. Every time he solved a problem or stabilized a crisis, she watched with something like pride. But not everyone welcomed him. Late one evening, as Ethan packed his things, he overheard two executives whispering near the elevators. He's dangerous. He's a nobody. He's going to replace all of us. Ethan walked past them quietly, ignoring the sting. He had lived too many years with far worse than whispers. He took the elevator down to the lobby, stepping into the cool night air. The city glowed beneath skyscrapers, humming with life. As he walked toward the bus stop, a familiar voice called out behind him. Ethan! He turned. Victoria hurried down the steps, hair slightly windswept from moving too fast. You forgot this, she said, handing him his folder. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, I meant what I said earlier. I believe in what you can do. Not for me, for yourself. He looked at her carefully. Why is this so important to you? She breathed out. Because I've spent my life surrounded by people who want power. You're the first person I've met who wants purpose. Their eyes held. Not romantically. Not professionally. Something different. Something human. Get home safe, Ethan, she said, turning back toward the building. You too. He took the bus home, and when he opened the door to their apartment, his daughter ran into his arms. Daddy, did you bring the crayons? He smiled, truly smiled, for the first time all day. Yes, sweetheart. I did. She giggled and tugged him toward their little kitchen table. And in that tiny apartment, with its flickering lights and mismatched chairs, Ethan remembered why he fought so hard, why he left the world at the top, why he was stepping back into it now, not for money, not for prestige, but for her, always for her. And tomorrow he would walk into that boardroom again, not as a waiter, not as a ghost of who he once was, but as the man he had quietly been all along.